Hello.
Hey, Greg.
Good morning.
Hey, good to see you.
Likewise.
All right, we can go ahead and get started. We're now broadcasting.
Awesome. Okay, we have a lot to get through today. Let's get started with the dev updates. Meta, are you ready?
I am.
Awesome.
I had a request last time to post my written update that I often read from or use as a reference, so I'll do that today. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Excellent. This is in our public wiki. I oftentimes share the link in the member Discord and in the member, well, not the member, but in the Telegram channels as well. So anyone can get access to this link and get a written copy of the update if they so wish. So I'll try not to read from it, not verbatim at least. So for me, I am playing catch up. I have, being out for a couple weeks, I need to get the Node 6 specification done. That is when we want to implement sharding on the network, and there's still a good amount of discussion around sharding and security. So that is the highest on my list. I've also spent some time working on specifying the performance test. As everyone is aware, one of the key requirements of the platform is that we're able to demonstrate 40,000 COM events per second. And so we need to have a performance test that is, I'd like to use the term auditable, but definitely repeatable at a minimum. So anyone should be able to independently verify the results of our performance test. So there's a lot that goes into that simple statement, right? We would need to come up with, we need to be very thoughtful in terms of what types of tests we're going to run, what types of scenarios those tests involved. In any case, a performance test strives to actually mimic the behavior of an actual living network, but it can never exactly match that. So how close, how far away from an actual living network are we willing to deviate in terms of the structure, and the test cases that comprise the performance test need to be called out, and any assumptions that we're making will need to be called out. And then we would need to subject both the code and the tests that are part of the performance tests. We would put those in GitHub and let people independently verify and audit those to keep us honest. So there's a good amount of work that would need to go into the performance test. And our goal is to demonstrate the performance at as part of the RCon 3 conference. As part of the testnet launch ceremony, we would demonstrate the performance of the newly launched testnet. So that is our goal and our hope. I'm also working on the network boot specification. So that I'm working with Marco Birch on that in terms of what does the Genesis block look like? How do we create the Genesis block? How do we get the Genesis block signed by all the validators? How do we get it audited? So Kelly, myself, and Michael are working on that. Kelly's going to be spending a lot of time figuring out how to recruit validators for the testnet launch, and working on exposing the RockRev addresses, right, for the RockRev transfer, and making sure that those are available to the community. So it's a multi-pronged approach. We've got a bunch of development work we need to do, and we've got a bunch of community engagement we need to do. So she and I are splitting our efforts accordingly. We're also talking a lot. We're going to start talking about RChain cost, execution cost. Do we have a mint? How do rewards work, et cetera, et cetera. So lots of questions around this. Some of those items will have to go to the membership with respects to blockchain governance. So those will probably land up as initiatives for the members to vote on come October. But we do need to identify what's going to go in front of the membership, what decisions the team are making. So we're kicking off a series of discussions starting on this Friday. Initially, the conversations will be internal to the dev team, but at some point we will be opening those up to members so they can attend and participate in the conversations. So look for updates on those in the coming weeks. So into the more detailed development status, the Rolang team making great progress on their current sprint backlog. Variable references are in review. We entered our next sprint, sprint 10 on Monday. We are working on specifying deterministic unforgeable names. So we need this for validity checks and consensus. So as you're aware, unforgeable names are names that can't be guessed or specified by the contract author, right? This goes a long way in terms of having private contracts, private names that are not available or accessible unless you are given a reference to that name. You don't know that the name exists. So this is an important feature, and we need it. The consensus team needs to have this feature in order to make sure that the names are valid. So we're working on that. We've got a PR for the sets implementation and Roland coming today. Mateusz is making great progress on that. He'll be working on maps after that. One of the things that we wanted to do was try to see if we could build Roland. All of our blessed contracts would need to be built as part of building the package. And we were wanting to do something with SBT so that the build process for our Roland blessed contracts would be seamless. But it's not working out to be very good. Michael Birch has been having a really difficult time working with SBT. We came up with a less than ideal solution that's similar to our BNFC approach today. We're going to go ahead and implement that, and we probably will want to switch to a new build system, but we're not going to do that before Mercury. We'll probably do that before, like after Mercury, before Venus. So immediately after shipping Mercury, the team will probably take a look at migrating to a new build system away from SBT, but we're not going to take it on now. It's too much risk. And on the Casper side, we're implementing checks on justifications. As soon as Michael Birch is done with his Roland building process, he's going to be working on integrating history and rollback. For those of you that may be curious about that, Henry did deliver history and rollback on schedule on Monday. Michael has the code. He'll start integrating that as soon as he's done with his Roland piece. The node team, so starting with history and rollback, Henry delivered that on Monday. We're now working on improving the try to reduce the number of reads in the database. And this is a performance enhancement. Another performance enhancement, update RSpace to support in-memory version of RSpace. So basically, for the hot tuple space, we will run that purely in memory. Instead of going to disk, we'll limit going to disk in as much as we can to boost performance. We're working on metrics to measure COM events. So again, like I'm all about performance measurement right now. I want to get a very early analysis of what we're looking like. We need this information before we can start specifying and ordering hardware to bootstrap the testnet. We need to have an answer for potential validators in terms of what kind of equipment they need to provision. And we can't do that without having some measure of performance. So by the end of this sprint, I want to know how many COM events we can support on a given instance, for a given hardware footprint. We're working on trying to move to GitLab. We've got some challenges in getting the PR level testing. As you guys are all aware, if you look in GitHub, you'll notice green checks or red checks. My question to Jeremy is like, when do I get my green check via GitLab? And we've run into some challenges there. We're going to be escalating to their sales engineering team to get a rapid resolution rather than spinning cycles on it. We have more challenges with integrating SEC P251K1 with TLS. I am going to talk with Nash about possibly dropping this requirement and moving to R1 in the communications project only. We need to support the K1 curve for Ethereum keys. That will be more important for validator keys and Rev, wallets or purses, for lack of a better term. But basically, if I want to hold Rev at an address, I need to be able to support a K1 key for that so we can do our ROC Rev swap seamlessly. But this is only for the communications portion, which is the node identity. So the node identity would no longer be an Ethereum compatible node identity. K1 has also been reported to be less secure than R1. So it really kind of behooves us to look at using an R1 or a more secure curve versus the K1 curve. So I'm going to be talking with Nash later about that. Roscala team. So we had some good progress on Roscala this last sprint. So I'm very happy to report that we got the object code export is done and merged. This is the object code from the C++ implementation of Rosette. There's a file called boot.rbl that loads up all the runtime objects that are needed by the virtual machine. We have implemented an export directly from the C++ system, and our goal is to import those objects into the Roscala VM. This way we don't have to implement the RBL compiler within Roscala. That was an effort to try to simplify the project. We made good progress on the transition function. Tim communicated that he is going to cut a PR later today. He's adding tests. It might roll to tomorrow, but basically he is very pleased that he's mostly done with it. Just looking for tests on that front. And we're also working on a multi-threading implementation. We're going to have a pull request for that soon. There are significant changes to the data structure and the opcodes as a result of multi-threading. And a little bit of the Rosette semantics will be changing as a result of multi-threading support. Greg, you'll be able to review that come Friday morning. Today, the team asked about potentially branching off the pure Rosette implementation versus the multi-threaded implementation. And I have discouraged them from doing that. And I would prefer to keep the entire code base in one place and then use either compiler directives or something equivalent to get a more formal version of the VM vis-a-vis the multi-threaded version. I'm just not a fan of branching the code base in that way. It just becomes very complicated. Website, we updated the website with the RNode 0.4 release. So if you can, spread the word on the node release. We'd love to hear feedback on RNode. I also put something out there in the node testing channel. Those of you that are interested in testing RNode, I am curious to test RNode 0.4. So if you have expressed an interest in testing, I put some preliminary dates out there, but didn't get a lot of traction. I think Tuesday morning was a preferred date, but I got 5 pings. So I'm announcing it here that I would like to run another round of node testing. I think it would be interesting. We have a brand new communications layer using TLS. We have a flavor of consensus, and it would be kind of cool if people could try deploying their contracts. And let's see what we get. I'd like to put it through its punches a little bit. I think it would be really interesting for the dev team to get some feedback. So meet me in the node testing channel and let me know if you're interested in participating, and we'll put some dates out there, and let's get, like 30 or 40, 50, 60 people running RNode 4, and let's do like a all hands test. I think it would be really great. RCon 3 registration is open. There's an early bird special for registrations made before July 31st. So if you're going to join us in Berlin, please do register. I believe, Kelly, keep me honest here, do we have a preliminary program up on the site as well so people can go and take a look at the content that's planned?
There's a preliminary program speaking directly to highlights and the type of programming that will be available. We will have a much more detailed program available later this month.
Okay, terrific. Thank you. Special rate for students, and we're also calling for volunteers. So reading here directly, RChain board approved funds to be used for the purposes of offering scholarships to attend RCon 3. So we're looking for volunteers to review scholarship applications and make recommendations for fund distribution. So there's a link to apply for the scholarship committee. And there's more information about the scholarship itself coming later this month. So right now we're looking for volunteers to participate in performing the vetting and helping us get the scholarship process booted correctly. Anything to add to that, Kelly?
Nope, well done.
Great. Any questions on my update?
Well, I will have lots of questions about the change in Rosette semantics and data structures. So, but I'll wait until the pull request.
Exactly. Yes, and it will be like we have time slated on Friday to talk about it too as well. Right.
Yeah, there's also a number of issues that you've touched on that actually have wider import. I know that you and I spoke about them on at our wrap-up meeting on Friday. But people need to be aware that you don't get to just be a validator. In order to be a validator, you have to stake the network. And so I think the community needs to come to grips with the fact that if we're going to widen the pool of participants in validation, they're going to have to acquire some tokens. We need to talk as a community about the right mechanisms for making tokens available for people or organizations that want to be validators. So I think this is a discussion that we need to get underway as soon as possible. I have some particular proposals, but first I just want the community to be aware that, in order to be a validator, you've got to stake the network, which means you have to have tokens, and that means that you have to acquire those tokens in some fashion. So I think it's up to the co-op to provide a mechanism whereby interested parties who want to be validators can acquire those tokens. And I think that should not be the same as just buying them on exchanges. I think that should be managed by and through the co-op. So we need to start having that discussion very, very soon.
As an implementation detail, as part of booting the testnet, what we have, Michael Birch and I have discussed, is that if you're bonding as a validator, there will be an Ethereum address that will wind up being, and all of the tokens at that Ethereum address will wind up being bonded. So right. If you're interested in bonding as a validator and you already own ROC tokens, what will need to happen is you will need to split your holdings into separate addresses if a subset of your holdings are what you intend on bonding on the network to a separate Ethereum address, which you will then in turn provide to Kelly or myself or whoever is doing the validator list collection, for lack of a term, for those bonded addresses and the bond amounts. So yeah. That's the simplest way we thought of performing the bond.
Yeah,
the testnet bond. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but this becomes a much more the rubber meets the road when we start talking about staking for the main net, and so we're going to have to provide people an access to ROC tokens. The ROC token holders are not currently the total set of entities that we want to be staking the network by any stretch of the imagination.
I think that's right, absolutely. And just so everybody is aware, it is our intention to demo the launch of mainnet via the launch of testnet. So in as much as we can, the launch of testnet will mirror or mimic the launch of mainnet. It is our intention, practice makes perfect. So we intend on practicing this process a few times before we actually do the actual production launch of the network. So we want it to be as smooth as possible, and we want all the actors to know what the process is going to be. So that means a few trial runs, and the big public trial run of that is going to be the testnet launch. So we're already starting to talk about the design of how the boot's going to work, how the Genesis block will be signed, how it will be audited, et cetera, et cetera. So just know that work is in flight as well.
Absolutely. Thank you, Meta. Excellent update as usual. Very, very good. So we have a whole bunch of topics to get through, but I did want to hear from Reflective and Pythia about the progress on dApps.
Hi, Greg, it's Steve. I'm filling in for Greg Heiss today. So I'm prepared to give the Reflective update.
Sweet. It's good to hear from you, Steve. It's been a while.
Thanks, Greg. So I'm sitting here with Renal, and we're actually, the whole team's out in Boston this week, or the whole team except for Lee. Renal and I are sitting on the MIT campus, and we've had meetings all day, very productive with not only people from their blockchain program, but also some companies we're in negotiations with in regards to doing some potential deals that will be very interesting to not only you, Greg, personally, but to the community and the RChain ecosystem. So we're excited to share those in the coming weeks. The rest of the team is over at Harvard doing similar meetings. So everybody's had to kind of split up and So at any rate, that's what we're doing this week. I wanted to just give a couple of quick updates in regards to the office. So we will be doing a soft move in to the office in Pioneer Square on Monday. We anticipate that it'll take a week or two to sort of get everything completely set up and ready for the public, but we'll be in on Monday and working towards getting everything hooked up and all the desks and everything put in the right spots. The other update that I wanted to give is that we've tentatively set a date for our deal day, and that's July 25th. That date is a soft date. We may adjust it a day or two either way. So if anyone from the community has a company they think would be a good candidate to present at our deal day, please email info@reflectiveventures.io. We'd love to hear from the community, and we'd also love to get some participants from the community that'd be interested in maybe sitting on a panel to help us sort of evaluate anyone that presents. So just hit that email and we'll get back to you and figure out the level of participation and involvement. The other thing that I wanted to let everybody know is Renal and I are going to be in Berlin, meeting with a few companies around the 8th of July. And anyone over there that would love to meet with us, or any companies that you think we should be meeting with, please reach out to either one of us. And obviously, we're going to be spending some time with Resonate and Peter, and at any rate, just generally doing business for about 10 days. On the deal front, so we have 2 announcements to make. I'm going to make one, and then Renal's going to make the other. We closed a deal with a company, the name I cannot disclose today, but the deal is closed and funded. It's a major technology security company that is working in the blockchain space. We're pretty excited about it. We're thrilled to be a part of it. And I think the community will really, as we just have to get the final approval to make the official public announcement, but we're working through that, and we'll probably do that next week. The other one I'm going to give to Renal. So that's it for me. I'm going to pass it to Renal.
Hi, everyone. So deal number 14 for us is Augmate. Many of you have probably met Greg Rocco and Brian Rogers. They attended our event at Consensus, and they were also out in Boulder for the whole Dev conference. Augmate is looking to provision and create the standards for the IoT landscape. We're very, very impressed with the team. The CEO, Pete, total rock star, and the CTO that they recently hired was the chief visionary at Cisco. I think he was like employee number 110 at Cisco. It's Dave Evans. Should look him up. He actually invented the term Internet of Everything, and really is a luminary in the IoT space. We couldn't be more thrilled to be partnering with them. We have a signed agreement, and we're moving to close as soon as possible. Any questions, guys?
This is very exciting. I'm really, really happy to hear about this.
As are we. Yeah, we're really excited about both of these, and a lot of interesting things in the pipeline too. And hopefully, in the coming weeks, we'll have more updates.
Sweet. I sent Greg Heiss a note. I haven't had a chance to reach out to Walter Fontana, but Walter Fontana, who is the principal of the Fontana Lab at Harvard Systems Biology, was a longtime collaborator. I spent some time out there as a visiting scientist at Harvard Systems Biology, largely because the process calculi have so many applications to systems biology, including modeling cell signaling in a variety of cell signaling regimes. So Yeah, if you guys get a chance, pop by Walter's office, and I'll try to get an introduction over to him. But just drop by and bug him. he's a great guy and absolutely a lot of fun to hang out with.
Great. Yep, we'll do our best to make that happen.
Sweet.
We were just in our lunch meeting with an MIT professor. We were just having that exact conversation. It is eerily coincidental.
Yeah,
that was Renal. I was listening. Renal was making that, having that discussion.
Sweet. No, that's wonderful. Cool. Anything else, or should we turn it over to Pythia?
We're good. Thank you
Sweet.
very much for your time.
No, thank you. Who from Pythia wants to give an update?
It's me, Lawrence. So great, thanks for that. So we've got our own pitch day scheduled courtesy of the Vancouver and British Columbia government the second week of July. So we'd love to have some participation as well from the audience in the larger community. And once we've got the exact dates, it'll probably be the 11th or 12th, maybe both days, depending on how many companies are coming in to pitch. They're scheduling that for us. So look for more details on that. We're very excited to do that. We will also coordinate with the marketing team any promotional materials. We're seeing a tremendous amount of questions and requests on industry standards. Obviously, we're already doing identity, meeting with a payments company at the end of next week to talk about how they can participate in blockchain and become part of the larger community. We've got building and construction, people who are building standards there and looking specifically at blockchain and how it can become part of the ecosystem. And to that end, we've got 3 different businesses pitching to us around that. Supply chain freight forwarding, I mentioned last week. We're looking at investment, closing that out for distributed exchange. As I mentioned, there are 3 architecture, and we're now up to about 55 companies in the pipeline. We'll start providing more deeper detail and have hopefully get some opportunity to have some of the companies themselves give those brief updates. So that's it from us for now.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that, Lawrence. So with respect to the deal days for both of you, I had a discussion about this with Greg Heiss, and I really want to pursue this. I think I had this funny idea back when Kickstarter was really very popular and grabbed a lot of attention, which was, why couldn't we run Congress this way? Have a much more democratic process. And I think a similar kind of vision was at work with Stephen Tools, when he was thinking about the DAO. I think we might want to think about Deal Day in a similar way, right? The process, if we get it right, if we package it right, could also be used for communities who want to use the RChain platform to fund various activities within the community. And those communities could be scales. Right now, we're essentially talking about the community of entrepreneurs. But we could expand that community or that notion of what the community is. We could scale it down to a neighborhood, right? So maybe a group within the neighborhood wants to go and clean up all the traffic circles, or a group within the neighborhood wants to address some obstruction to a walking path. And so these various groups could present their proposals to the community. The community could evaluate them in near real time and decide how to fund them, right? Or whether they're worthy of funding. And it's the same kind of mechanism that you're proposing in Deal Day. It's just repurposing it to a variety of different communities.
Greg, it's eerie that this is the second time that it's an exact conversation that we've been having over at Reflective. We actually have a fairly solid plan on how events should roll out, and not just be entrepreneur focused, but really about seeding the infrastructure across all sorts of organizations and participants. It's a long conversation, which probably better offline than here, because we take up the entire call. But it's just uncanny that you mentioned that, because that's something that we've been literally talking about very recently.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think we should come to rely on the uncanny here at RChain. Very good. No, I'm excited. I'm excited about this, and I just really want people to be thinking about how Deal Day might become something where communities can become more self-directed, self-determined. So great. That's awesome. And speaking of which, we have a guest from our European community, Tim Bansimer, who's here to give an update on the work that's going on in Europe. Tim, are you around to give
yeah.
Thank you.
Definitely. Thanks, Greg. And I think, yeah, this is a very good point. You already came up with a governance issue. So we are thinking since the Ethereum conference, the ECC in Paris, a lot about the governance issue, because the Ethereum community had major debates after the DAO hack. They had major debates after the parity hack, how to handle, for example, forks, how to handle improvements of the network, how to communicate between the miners and the node and the programmers. How can we have engagement of different stakeholders in the community? And those stuff will hit us as well with the growing community. We know that already after we did the governance conference in Seattle, that governance is an issue where we think about how can we optimize communication, or how can we, in the longer run, enable massive collaboration and massive interaction to come up with hopefully wiser decisions and being able to understand and hearing more issues of the community and being able to understand or find better solutions, propose new solutions. Given that, we agreed on with the co-op for initial funding to start to organize a conference fully dedicated on governance, the DGov 18, or the World Summit for Distributed Governance, which is planned to take place in Athens in Q4 this year. While doing so, we started to communicate with major players in that space to get their understanding of what they need to participate in that debate and how they see actually the debate. We had conversations with the EIP 0 team, which is a governance, say, a movement out of the community of Ethereum as well. But we know also from other organizations and infrastructure providers like Dash that they have a lot of debates around that. They have a bounty program around that. Status EM is launching their Swarm bounty program. Given all that, I believe, and the organization team around me, we believe that the governance issue is a cross-platform, cross-D-app issue, and that we can learn a lot from each other. So given that, we will launch external communication on that event in the upcoming week. We already have, say, a first small communication part in place, but major upgrades will come next week to that. I post the link to it in the chat as well. It's dgov.earth. We are currently getting the commitments of some major influencers in the space so that we have successful outreach. We're currently looking for volunteers. So if you want to become a volunteer for such a conference, feel free to sign up at the website. There's a Google form for that. You can also join the Slack community if you want to actively participate. We're planning currently to launch a wiki, because the whole issue of governance is a field which is developing, and we try to involve as many people as possible to exchange thoughts in that space up front. And we are currently planning there are two other events which I think should be taken not unnoticed. Which is in Berlin is the Magician Council in July from the 14th to the 15th, which is focusing on the governance issues in the Ethereum community. And we plan on the original date of the governance conference, which we are currently hardly seeing on holding an unconference in Berlin on governance on the 7th and 8th, following directly the RCon 3 conference. So we make it as smooth as possible for those people from the RChain community which want to participate to be able to engage in that in that debate. So far from my side.
Excellent. No, so thank you very much. We're very excited. And can you just remind me the dates of the Athens conference? Just one more time.
For like the Q4, we don't have a confirmed date yet because we don't have a confirmed venue and we don't have a confirmed major sponsor right now. Without those, we cannot announce the date, but we are working very, very hard on that to get that done. So I assume that we will have a date announcement in the next 2 weeks.
Okay, all right. We can. The co-op can help with the landing a sponsor and also help with securing a venue.
Okay, I would love to follow up with that conversation after we started. Like the mission statement is done. After we redesigned the website, launched the website, I would love to have that conversation, Greg. Okay,
very good. Sounds good. Awesome. Thanks so much for the update. Along those lines, I'm happy to report that this morning, Ayla and the team around the setting up of the European co-op reviewed a draft of minimum viable bylaws, which are which are necessary to get the setup of the Genossenschaft through the registration process with the authorities in Germany. So we had a lot of commentary. We learned that there are some key differences between the way German co-ops are set up and U.S. co-ops are set up, and we're constructing kind of the bridge so that we want to keep both sets of bylaws in as much harmony as we possibly can, while recognizing that there are just differences in terms of how things operate in different jurisdictions. The draft has been sent to Martin Davis, who's our external counsel, and also to Evan Jensen, who's in-house counsel. And we are we're looking for that input from those stakeholders, and then hopefully we have a version that everyone is happy with enough. Or, again, sort of if the aim is to have the co-op registered by RCon 3, then the game plan is to get a minimal set of bylaws in place that will allow for the registration event, and then get them more in alignment with between the two organizations before after we've got that we've secured our viability as a co-op, and that seems both realistic and also gives us the flexibility that we need. To that end, we are also setting up. So I just want to have people aware of what the current proposal is. So I've talked on several Hangouts about wanting to set up a kind of mutually supportive relationship, a set of dependencies, cyclic dependencies between the organizations. Now, oftentimes we think of cyclic dependencies as bad things, but in computer science, cyclic dependencies are good things. Like the cyclic dependency between names and processes is at the very heart of the row calculus, and this kind of mutual recursion is a very good thing. In fact, it even extends all the way to fundamental physics. If you believe Einstein's model of gravity, then the stress energy tensor depends on the metric, which changes as a result of the stress energy tensor. So these kinds of cyclic dependencies are actually really fundamental rather than stumbling blocks, or they can be. And so what is the mutual dependency that we want to set up here? So the thought is that our RChain US cooperative is all about the bits and bytes of the basic platform. So it's providing the consensus algorithm. It's providing the smart contracting and execution model, and it's providing nice things like the ladle algorithm and the type checking. But it's all the core technology that makes up the platform. But that doesn't include other things which are necessary for functioning as a co-op, right? So as a co-op, we have to be able to vote. And in order to vote and ensure that only members are voting, we have to be able to have a notion of identity. So there are a core set of governance pieces, and in particular, on-chain governance pieces, including identity, including the collection, the expression and collection of sentiment and will that we want to be able to provide in order to have a good governance. And that's separate from the social layer of governance. This is really, the technological infrastructure that's supporting governance. So the idea is that RChain Europe is going to take on the governance pieces. So, and this is not that they're setting governance policy, but rather they're providing core elements of the governance infrastructure, the on-chain governance infrastructure that makes it possible for the co-op to operate. So they can't build those if they don't have the platform. On the other hand, the platform, can't be self-governed if it doesn't have a good set of tools to support that governance, and especially to support it at global scale, which is what we're talking about. So that's the kind of mutual dependency that we're talking about, and that feels right. It also makes it possible for RChain Europe to branch out. So as you've heard us talk a lot about, there's a whole platform cooperative movement. And by connecting through into the platform cooperative movement, RChain has really opened out into this much larger world of cooperative efforts. And here, what we're talking about is providing to these platform cooperatives a bunch of tools, in particular RChain-based governance building blocks that they can use to support their efforts. So there's a secondary market that's not just RChain US or the RChain family, but reaches out into larger markets both in Europe and around the world. So that's a whole mouthful. Let me stop and check in with folks and see if they have any questions about the stuff that's preceded. That's amazing. We have perfect understanding.
And that's just too quiet. Hey, I just want to maybe use the opportunity to highlight, RChain's participation with other co-ops, and I'll put a link in the chat to the Cooperative Business Journal's most recent publication here, which features an article by Nathan Schneider, an article about Resonate with Peter Harris, and even has a little photo I found in here showing Ella Cagle. So I'll pass that on in the chat.
That's awesome. That's really, really cool. Very, very good. Okay. So hopefully with that we can move on to some of the other discussion that needs to take place. Alan, do you have any updates about the bounty system?
Yes, I'd like to give a quick update on what's happening in the bounty system. The theme of this meeting has turned out to be governance, and we've been facing some governance issues within the bounty system. We do reward contributors for making important contributions. We've been doing that in a relatively haphazard manner, and we're trying to build a governance system that's adequate for the task. Tim may have some ideas on what we can use. So far, we have something that we're calling our trust metric algorithm that we're using to set budgets and rewards. We're also investigating a discussion and consensus formation tool that I've been in discussion.
Hello, Alan?
Has not been fully.
I think he's having a connection issue.
Yeah. Okay. We'll circle back. Maybe we can.
Thank you.
Alan, are you there now?
Yeah, I'm back. I apologize. I'm traveling, but and everybody's been. But in any case, we are coming across some real life issues where we have disagreements, where we have to face disagreements and come to a cooperation at some amount of scale. It's quite interesting process to be going through with voting, and soon with these discussion tools that will promote consensus formation before we have any votes or in advance of any votes.
Very good. Thank you, Alan. I'm looking forward to that. I'm also really looking forward to a set of metrics for the bounty system, which I think might help with governance. It's much easier to govern yourself if you know what your remit is.
Yes, that's true, Greg. Thank you.
Okay, so moving on, I want to spend some chunk of time talking about the ROC to Rev swap, and in particular, I know that Jim Weisgarver has been very vocal about his concerns with the proposed ROC to Rev swap mechanism, and so the whole point here is radical inclusion. So especially we want to respect the voice in the wilderness, and I think that Jim has felt a little bit like a voice in the wilderness with respect to the community response to his concerns. So I'd like to take a little bit of time now and have Jim sort of talk through his perspective, and get some response just from those present on Jim's concerns and how this alternative mechanisms might address Jim's concerns. Or whether or not the existing mechanism perhaps maybe addresses the concerns, and there just wasn't a good understanding of that. But anyway, Jim, if you're ready, why don't you talk about your concerns and some possible solutions.
Sure. I mean, I love the idea of the airdrop, and if there was a way that we could make every rock good doing that, I'd be all in favor of it. I mean, it's a no-brainer. But the fact is, we're putting the burden on the rock holders to ensure that their tokens are not on contracts at the time when we reach the designated block height, which hasn't been determined. And in many cases, people won't be informed. In many cases, they may be informed, but they don't realize that the tokens they deposited on EtherDelta won't be recoverable, and they won't be able to get rev without a very complex process of trying to prove that they own the rocks and et cetera, which is this cleanup that would have to go on that would take away a lot of resources from doing the real work and solving the real problems of handling cross-chain transactions, which is something that we have to do anyway. I think we have a responsibility to make every rock good, and I think it's just a despicable attitude for us to not care about the people that are victims because they didn't keep the rocks in the right place, or because after we reach the block heights and rocks become worthless, they accept rocks for payment because they don't know that the rocks are worthless. I think we're responsible to the victims of what we're doing, and there should, you know, I think that the whole spoofing contract argument is a red herring. It's a straw man. I don't believe that it's any different from spoofing logging into RChain and, you know, getting people's credentials for RChain or whatever. But I think that if a rock is always good for a rev or some ratio of revs, that it'll serve as a stable coin or pegged to the rev that would have utility in facilitating cross-contract contracts. So I think it's a good thing that rock is always good for rev, and that every rock will be good for rev. And it's a good thing because it has utility on the network.
Thank you, Jim. Was that the sort of the meat of your argument? Is that the essence of it?
I think so. What other questions?
So I just want to ask a few clarifying questions. When you say rock is always good, I mean, certainly if I have redeemed a rock for a rev, I don't get to redeem it again, right?
That's right. When they trade the rock for rev, it goes back into the treasury.
Okay. Okay. All right. So that means that either the co-op has to hold it or it has to be burned, one or the other.
Right. That's a separate issue. I mean, it's our treasury of rock that backs the rock ultimately, although there's no purpose in selling the rock higher or lower than the rev, because you just lose money.
Okay, all right. So I just wanted to make sure I understood what you meant by the word always. As a mathematician, I think of crazy possibilities a lot of times.
As long as Ethereum is still running.
Sure. Okay, that makes sense. That makes sense. And the next question is one of scale. Do you know how many token holders there are?
No, I don't know.
Right. So I think that's something that we can, because it runs on the Ethereum blockchain, we can just figure out. We can discover the number of token holders there are, or at least the number of addresses to which rocks are distributed, and then the token holders will be some multiple of that, and then the other thing that we can do is we can figure out exactly which of those addresses are just plain vanilla addresses and which of them correspond to smart contracts. So we can actually look at a percentage. We can do a quick analysis and see how big this problem is. My own estimate is that there are high hundreds or to mid hundreds of token holders, and that there's a small percentage of them, on the order of 20%, that have tokens in contracts. So I think the notification problem is not very large.
So I thought that, Greg, I thought this was initially in response to somebody sending rocks to the RChain contract address by accident. And then basically he's asking like what the recourse is, like, hey man, I just sent like $4,000 to this RChain contract address by accident.
No, that's a separate issue completely.
Separate issue completely. Okay. Okay.
Yeah. So what Jim is concerned about. So there are two proposals. There are two sort of broad stroke proposals that we might consider. Maybe there are some others, but we'll consider just the two in order to keep the conversation bounded. So one approach is that we make some smart contracts that that run on both chains, right? So we'll have a smart contract on the Ethereum chain and a smart contract on the RChain chain, and that will provide the sort of lockstep exchange of one token for another. Now it turns out that that's exceptionally hard, right? We tried to do that for the AMP to ROC conversion, and after 3 months worth of work, the party that we contracted to is an expert in space basically couldn't get it done. So the AMP redemption process had to be done by hand. But let's assume that we could get it done. I mean, and that it's at least twice as long. So that's 6 months from now. So that would put us in December to be able to make that. So maybe the timelines line up or maybe not, but it's possible. So then, but that's the basic idea is you'd have a couple of smart contracts, which means all the liability is on the co-op. If there's a bug in either smart contract, the co-op is liable for that. And then there's a second tier liability, which is that in an area where we don't speak the language, for example, in China or Korea, someone could represent to the Chinese community that they have the address for the contract for doing the swap. And we are unable to police these kinds of parties because they can come and go, they can change their, just like any other phishing attack, they can change their presentation, and it's in a language we don't know about. So they present, let me just finish. So they present to the sub community that they're the official swap site. Then unsuspecting token holders, for example, token holders who've gotten their tokens off of KuCoin, then send their ROC to this fake address. And then that party turns around and goes to the correct address. They collect the rev, leaving the unsuspecting token holders holding the bag. So that's a real attack. It's a phishing attack, and I don't know how we could possibly police against that. So that's. Go ahead.
Let me address that, okay? Because it's simple to address. I mean, the spoofing is going to happen. People are going to be phishing on anything, but if authentication on RChain is required to initiate the transfer, then they've gotten somebody to believe they're spoofing RChain, and they can get their RChain credentials as well. I would say that although I don't believe that's our responsibility, spoofing is not under our control. We do have to warn people against spoofing, and make sure they know to come to the right place to get to RChain. But the point here is that there's no RChain credential. There's just an address. There are lots and lots of token holders who have gotten their tokens off of exchanges like KuCoin. So the spoofer could come in from that direction, right? They pretend to be a KuCoin holder or a token holder who got their stuff off of KuCoin, and they're exchanging. So they go to the official contract, but where they got their actual tokens was because they spoofed someone else. So that's a gigantic notification problem that we can't possibly police, right? So it's that notification problem in my mind is very large, and I don't know how to stop it. Now,
so Greg,
if the contract can only be initiated from the RChain network, okay, we're not going to get transactions that come from someplace else.
Again, that doesn't help, because what we're trying to do is support people who are token holders who've gotten their tokens off of exchanges. So we've talked a little bit about one approach. The other approach is the airdrop approach, which is what the community voted on. So in the airdrop approach, what we do is we look at the Ethereum blockchain and we find a block height. And beyond that block height, we're not going to look at any changes in balances, right? So it's a frozen block height where we have a map of addresses to rock balances. And then when the Genesis block goes live, those addresses and their corresponding private keys will just work on the RChain network. And the Genesis block will contain the exact same balances of rock. So no smart contracts, no moving parts. Everyone knows the block height. The community can review the balances in the Genesis block for 3 months or 2 months prior to when we go live, the launch of mainnet. And the one caveat or snag is that tokens that are locked up in contracts, we have to treat separately or specially. And there's a solution there, which is that you can do a key share, and Renki put up an implementation of key share during the Boulder Archon. And so you can get the equivalent of a multi-sig contract with the key share. And so then parties just move their tokens out of, so at the time of the frozen block height, parties move their tokens out of the multi-sig and into a single address where they've done the key share. And they have the equivalent functionality of the multi-sig, but it's at a single address. And this is only for a handful of contracts, or a handful of addresses, I mean. So that feels, and then the community is responsible for policing the balances, making sure that the balances in the proposed Genesis block line up with the balances at the proposed block height. And then in addition, we do a slow reveal of the block height, so that which helps with the marketing and the message around getting all attention on the block height. So that's the proposal. That's the alternate proposal, which is the airdrop proposal. From my mind, both proposals suffered a notification problem. But in the one, there's no way we can because a phishing attack could come from anywhere at any time, and there's no single party. And even a single party can have multiple different identities. We can't notify against that. Whereas in the airdrop, we have exactly one thing to notify the community of, which is the block height. And there are, as I said, mid to high hundreds of token holders. So the notification burden is not very large. And we've got an entire marketing organization, including this call today, devoted to getting the word out about the process and what they should expect. So that feels like it's a much more constrained notification problem than the other one. And the legal liability for the co-op is considerably diminished, right? We're not on the hook. We're not legally liable for the correct functioning of cross-chain contracts, which we already have experience with as being exceptionally difficult to get right, and which would put us up against the wall in terms of timelines. And the other thing to consider here is that we have no dev resources for those contracts right now. So we would have to get new dev resources just for those, and that would be a mission critical piece of work, and the whole thing would be beholden to that. So that's another consideration that we'd have to think about when we think about these things. So, but I want to make sure that you know, all perspectives are heard. I think I've made my leanings clear, but I want to be as open as possible to the different sets of concerns.
I would like to respond quickly.
Yes, please go ahead. I know we're over time, but this is an important debate.
I am hopeful that, you know, the rock will be the most popular thing since sliced bread, and millions of people will have them by the time we get to that blockhead. Now, I don't know how many, and we don't know how many there will be, but there will be a lot of cases that will come up because people will not be informed, such as they have the rock in a time lock vault, or they have it in as escrow in a bounty contract that can't be distributed yet. And you know, we will have legal issues because not all rock will be honored. I mean, you know, it will happen that we can't honor rock. And that's the one thing I want to prevent. And there are a number of cross-chain protocols that are in use. Multi-commit process is well known to accomplish it. I think that it would be worthwhile to handle the cross-chain issue because it's something that we will have to solve anyway, rather than spending our time and effort figuring out who owns a piece of rock.
So I hear you, Jim, and I let me just make sure I've reflected back. I think your principal concern here is rock holders who have rock locked up in contracts, which they can't get out before the swap. And that's a valid concern, and that
it's more than that. You know, it's that, you know, they would it's that we're making people go through all this trouble to keep their own property.
Okay, so that's an interesting point. So let's go through that perspective carefully. So I want to divide it into two groups. There are the groups who just have rocks in addresses. And then there are those who have rocks in contracts. So let's take the first group. The first group, what do they have to do? Nothing, right? They literally, their private keys for their rocks now work on the Rev. So they don't have to send rocks anywhere. They don't have to do anything. They just suddenly they have a Rev balance. So they literally don't lift a finger. And in the other proposal, that group now has to send rocks to an address and get Rev at another address.
Right, which is when
which is a lot more work, right?
The first time they use RChain, they transfer the rock transfer gets initiated from the RChain side. The user allows it, and it's a done deal. Okay.
Right. So they actually have to do something. They have to attend to something. They have to supply addresses, and they have to receive addresses. So there's
no, they don't. They use the same. They use the credentials of the address on RChain. Okay.
Oh, okay. So you're saying that that it's the same address, and then what happens?
Then the transfer is initiated from the RChain side.
How does that work? All the RChain can do is to request the rock, but it can't send, it can't take.
Right. It just starts the multi-phase process.
Right, but that's again, the user has to take the step to send. anyway, we should probably this part of it is more technical, but I guess that's my point. This is much more technical. There's a lot more moving parts, and the user does have to do something. In the airdrop case, the user does nothing. So we've dealt with group A, which is those who have ROCs at addresses. In group B, I say that the two are equivalent, right? So in group B, they have to whether we use the airdrop proposal or we use the other proposal, the user has to get the ROCs out of the contract and into another address.
Well, if they have ROC in their account, they don't, and then the ROC is always good. There's no reason they have to take it out of the contract.
That depends on the contract. The contract could be splitting it over multiple parties, so it really does matter, and they would have to get it out and divvy it up according to the rules of the contract. In either case, because we're not going to honor the Solidity contract directly on the RChain situation.
Right. Well, the idea was someday they were going to get it out, and then they can.
Right. Exactly.
Next time they use RChain, it'll initiate the exchange process.
No, but that doesn't work, right? It can't just do that because it will just go to a single address. It won't be governed by an equivalent contract. So that has to be done by the users who are using that contract. So, therefore, those users have to go through the exact same process that we're talking about, whether we're talking about the airdrop process or the multi-chain swap process.
Yeah.
So once we've done the analysis, right, it appears that there are clearly more steps and more risk in the network swap approach, like a lot more risk and a few more steps. So I think that's why
with the Ethereum, with the using the RChain wallet, a person, it could not ask them to allow the transfer from a ROC as a very simple thing. I don't see the complexity you're talking about.
Yeah, I'm not. Okay, so I think perhaps what this merits then is a write-up of the two approaches, so that we can clearly delineate the side-by-side analysis. I think for me, it was really important to walk this through, just so that people understand what went into the deliberations and why the community voted the way it voted. And I do want to make sure that people who have concerns have their concerns heard and addressed. I think right now, Jim, you and I are still in a dialogue where I just want to, first of all, make sure that you feel I understand what your proposal is, and that the co-op understands your concerns and your proposal. So let's make sure that we get to that step, that place where you feel heard, and then once we're clear that you feel like we have a grasp of what your concerns are and what your alternative proposals are, that we can then go through the analysis and hopefully, I think it's possible in this case to objectively come to sort of an optimal solution. But I'm happy to go through it, go through the dialogue with you and anyone else who supports this to make sure that everyone feels heard. And also, the reason I wanted to give airtime to this today is because I think we need to promote as much as possible what the solution that the community settled on back in Boulder. So and even if we want to revisit some issues, getting the word out about the rock to rev swap and spending time talking about that is really, really important. Which is why, so I thought, to me, there was several reasons to have this conversation.
I think we have
do you want
things here. I'm going to enter an issue in GitHub and create a document, and I ask everyone to collaborate on the document, and I guess
yeah,
it's really two parts. The proposal and sort of the issues and answers on both sides.
Sweet. No, thank you. That's great. And I feel like this is the way good governance happens. Someone else had a comment.
I just have some for color. So something similar to what was proposed here happened in the Maker DAO project. They had one of the first ERC20 tokens, and it was very expensive to move around, so they transferred or created a new MKR token. And it was a contract that was created that did a one-way swap. And so it's all on the same blockchain. And even still, only 76% of the token holders have actually done this, even without the complexities, lower complexities than what we've been talking about. So it has been tried before. So there are some metrics to look at in terms of how well these sorts of things work. I'll just paste a link to an Etherscan to the old MKR token, and people can take a look.
Thank you, Kenny. That's very helpful. That's really good to get that kind of data. I also think we should go ahead and start looking at the distribution of balances across across the addresses. Right, we're going to be wanting to do that anyway. Right, no matter as a preparation for what we're going to do with the rock to rev swap, but also to inform our decision-making processes and inform this debate and discussion.
So Greg, going forward, anything that I sort of deem as important, do you want me to just cut from these segments? Because this was like a diatribe. So this whole section can be cut into a video where, like,
Sure, no, that's a great idea. Yeah, if you want to cut this and frame it as a separate discussion and put it up on, that's fantastic. That's a great idea.
Awesome.
Good thinking. Yeah. Very, very good. So with that, that's probably a really good place to stop. We're almost 20 minutes past the hour. I really appreciate everyone's involvement, and it's just magical how the pieces are coming together. So thanks to everyone. See you next week.
Thank you.
Bye.